Dr. Mahmoud, I'll give you the floor, but before this, I want to say you have said something very good. You are an executive authority, so your role is applying the law. But there is a problem in the philosophy of the mindset. You say, for example, how to evaluate the hotel and the factory. The issue is that, and I think that the taxes should be viewed from both sides. It's not that I am combining it. So, if I couldn't make it, the thing is that the taxes is alone, and the Ministry of Finance alone, the competent minister alone. Each one should look to his interest, but in fact, it is the interest of the state. And so the philosophy is that everything should be viewed together, and that the ministers talk together. I have a problem with this, that anyone agree with someone else or talk with someone else. I think that the standards should be included in the law itself, because maybe their ideas are good, or their ideas are not good. It has nothing to do with the persons. So the idea of the standards, these are scientific standards that could be studied and added inside the law and be applied on all the people. The origin of the law is facilitation, and not making things harder. You are trying to make a lot of effort to make reconciliations. The origin of the law is to be easy, and the exception is the small thing that I want to exempt, not with many details. If it's already easy from the beginning and we have an in-kind registry and we know where our real estate, at that time we know what we will exempt from the taxes. The exemptions in Article 11, it is not a Quranic verse. Of course, this is good in the state, but it used to do the same thing as the private sector, the small factory as the big factory. It is not something that we couldn't touch or couldn't talk about because we are making an activity. The last thing, as an executive authority, your own agency or your own authority, and I think that there are a lot of efforts exerted in this regard. This executive authority, it needs upgrading, big upgrading, as to the people, and to have automation in the surveying. We have a colleague here, he lives in Upper Egypt. He said that the real estate person, he came and inspected some houses, and then I told him, you pay 2 million, you pay 3 million, and you pay 4 million without any reasons, because this randomness, it happens like when Capmas made and he let the people make the census, and they see the control room and he sees all the details, so there is no opportunity. It is that we don't give opportunity for manipulation.
Yes, please have the mic. In the name of God, and peace and blessings be on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, I'm very pleased to be among all these high-profile personalities. I'm honored, really, and I seize the chance to salute my professor and my brother, Mr. Ashraf Al-Arabi. I'm one of his students. in, Of course, there are certain issues. A historical introduction is very important. The real estate tax is present since the 19th century, and when the Ottoman Empire allowed ownership of the land, they started to put some rules for Armenians, for French, and in order to make them subdue to the real estate, but they challenged that, and the only solution was to have them included in the Committee of Monitoring and Statistics, but they didn't attend from the first place, so the committees were completely paralyzed until all the countries in London Conference I started to give the Egyptian or to acknowledge the Egyptian government right to impose the tax in 1882. The law was there and it was infatuated, and in all parts of Egypt when that time it was an Ottoman Empire appropriation. In the modern era, 1956 law, 54 law for 1956, it was back then a central government when after 52 revolution, after the law was released. By the way, this law gave back then exemption for any residence or leasing properties that are more than a certain number per year. So if which is 18 pounds at that time. But afterward, we had a lot of more than 30 laws that handle a lot of exemptions of real estate taxes. So, for example, in Sadat time, parties exemption law and associations exemption law. Scientific people just do a scientific elite law. Any group could make an association that would be exempted, and that's why there were factions, and it was really defragmented completely. 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40% was the price of the tax. There was fluctuation, but the big problem is that this law was imposed only on units inside the boundaries of the city. In 2008, Mr. Salah Muntasar in the parliament, where the law was discussed in the parliament, he was very surprised at the fact that a certain street have certain properties, and then an urban expansion took place. But the Minister of Local Development did not add this streets or this district to the boundaries or the cordon of the city. So we can find that at the same street, properties which are subjected to taxes and others which are not subjected in the same street. As to the law of the relationship between the stakeholders, there's exemption on all the units except the super luxury. What's really weird is that there were a lot of properties built before this law, and they were subjected, and buildings built after the law and was not subjected. It was very confusing and ambiguous and random. There should be one law, and in spite of the vision of Dr. Boutros Ghali, sometimes, we all know that certain media figures that were, deforming this way. We are in a scientific forum, but the far left believe that the country should own the means of production. I think that the only tax that was imposed in the 30 last years, where there are some features of taxation equity or equality, the law of 196. That's my introduction as a researcher, not as a citizen, not as a stakeholder. I'm just, speaking from the point of view of tax researching. The very important part that was not touched upon on the part of the research or the society is the part that is concerning what you're saying. A certain villa resident could not deal with the agency of taxation. What about if someone, is residing in a luxury villa but cannot pay? But the answer was a joke. He says, let him sell it. But that was not really a rational decision, and it's not a joke. in defining the relationship between the owner and the consumer, where there are residents, are governed by the old laws in the light of estimation of the leasing value. So if I'm staying in a property since, let's say, the 60s, and if I'm renting this unit to extended release system, then item 4 of the law 196 stipulates that the leasing rents go on as they are until this relationship is broken. So if I'm residing or living in a certain villa and I left it and I start leasing it to someone else, then there should be a revision of the rental or releasing value. So there were certain broad lines that necessitates expenditures would be estimated at 30%, and the exemption limit is around 24,000 of the leasing value, and the tax value. This is a very quick introduction. Historically speaking, let me read the item and the rental or leasing value and the exemptions which is subjected to the system of year 1977 and the law of 136 in the same respect, and all the laws that are relevant is that the leasing value should be reviewed after the breaking of relationship between the owner and the lessee. So I don't have a problem if someone is residing or living in a villa, for example, a long time ago, or a unit long time ago, even if the market value is 100,000, but at the time back then was a leasing value of 20,000, then the 20,000 should go on and on till today. Of course, I salute you for this informative presentation, but I have some comments concerning this presentation. I'll take it in accordance to sequence. One of the problems mentioned was that the tax, instead of being local, where the sum goes to the municipalities, the sum now goes incomplete to the general revenues of the state. But the law 119 included that 25% of these taxations go to the municipalities and 25% go to the slums. This is new, of course. What is the point behind the 50% of it goes to the finance ministry? So municipalities, what are the municipalities meant? At the time this law was discussed, there was a question in advanced countries. Is the tax paid by Zamalek inhabitants, for example, sophisticated suburb? So the collection of this real estate taxation, when it's allocated for Zamalek, what about Imbaba district or other poor districts? What are they gonna benefit out of this expenditures or collection? So at that time back then, the state saw that or envisioned that the Ministry of Finance will be responsible for the equitable distribution of the revenues of tax. As to the taxes concerning the institutions affiliated to the state, they should pay real estate taxation. But the law in item 11, one of the good points, it made a difference between the units or the properties which are exempted and others which are not subjected to the taxes. But any real estate is owned by the state and is used as a production unit, of course should be subjugated to the taxes, real estate taxes, we can find that all institutions affiliated to the state, they all have files in the Central Taxation Authority, and of course they bear this taxation on these production units. If I'm not on the right track, let someone correct me about this information. So, for example, if you go to any corporate, I mean, any public sector company, I'll give you the evidence. There were a lot of talks about the non-incurring income unit. Is that constitutional or not constitutional? You mentioned that, but in a nutshell, I want some details. There was a certain company of the public sector, and its units, they gave it to the laborers free, without any charge. And for the year 1954, there was a law that they make it subjected to the law. But then the Constitutional Authority mentioned that there is a difference. The defense back then had a guideline of this constitutional law concerning the empty lands, but the Constitutional Court said there is a difference, that there's a difference between a vacant land or empty land where the tax consumes, of course, money, and that's not constitution. But the court stipulated that when you have a unit or a property, the real reason behind it is to have a profit or revenue, and this profit or revenue might be real income if the owner gets a revenue, or may be another sort of in-kind income where the prerequisites are not there. But then the Constitution refused the appeal because it's not constitutional. The same text in law 19 or 160 and 96, the unconstitutional point or some suspicious around its inconstitutionality is that the present law stipulates a new idea in 196 law, and item 8 gave the details that the empty non-residential units to be subject to a certain system. Without mentioning names, the parliament, there were split about this addition, whether it's constitutional or no. Dr. Yusuf Boutrous Ghali, and I agree with him, and I agree with him, and some of the parliament deputies are using or are trying to use the sort of units that are not inhabited.
Dr. Yusuf Boutrous Ghali, when he talked about this, he said that the purpose is to motivate the person who is keeping the closed real estate, and so that he can put it and propose it for sale in the market. If I returned to the minister's laws, there was a talk in the cabinet. Someone was saying that I have two universities. How come that the two universities don't pay a real estate tax? This was one of the representatives of the cabinet at that time. Or I'm going to tell you that the real estate, when they are being imposed on the establishments and factories, it makes a problem. But the old law in 1954, in article number 10, it's talked about evaluating the leasing value for the factories. When the parliament was talking about this, and they said they want anything that copes with the current situation, and that the Ministry of Finance will not be the only entity deciding this, they said we don't have a problem in all the real estate, but there are some real estates with a special nature, and the civil community requested through their dialogues, especially after the crisis in the USA, and this led to the delay of working with the law 1956, and until there are the developments that we all know. The manufacturing establishments, we say we can give them a part of the care, but they were subject to the real estate tax. We can think how to help them, but the idea of having a protocol is a result of the community dialogue, that the enumeration committees will not put their own evaluations. You are saying that evaluation of the real estate tax should be based on the market value. The parliament didn't touch this in 2008, and at this time the head of the council, Dr. Ahmed Fathi Sroor, regardless of anything, he said that if we said that depending on the market value, it will be non-constitutional. This doesn't mean that it will be constitutional not only in our country, but you were one of the distinguished people in the 50 people committee that taxes in these establishments need re-studying. As to the private residence and the arguments that the private residence should be exempted, is it suitable that the real estate that I live in, or a villa, or any of the Egyptian citizens who lives in it with a market value of 40 million or 50 million, and another one couldn't find a place to reside, and the country wants to take from the rich to give to the poor, so this residence owned by this person, does the services offered need that this take this value, the expansion and the urbanization. So this should be a small price paid by any Egyptian citizen who has his own private tax, but the law puts the 2 million. We can say that this 2 million we need to restudy then. And I have talked about this with Dr. Samia at a conference last week, because when the law talks about the exemption of the 2 million pounds, it didn't include that after re-evaluation after 2 years, which is now 8 years, that the same price will be the same. So maybe if my apartment is 2 million pounds, and after 5 years another person, there is another or a new law. I have a lot of viewpoints in this. If there is any chance that I talk about it, I will talk about it. I don't want to talk a lot about this, and thank you very much. I'm just using the opportunity to say some words. When you said at the time of Dr. Batros Ghali that it will be centralized and then it will be redistributed because the one who comes from Zamalek is different from the one who comes from Mbeba. This is a very big experience in the field of finance, but as if you are saying that the income of the localities is only the real estate, but this real estate is a part of it, and this country is responsible to give, for example, the person in Mbaba something. So if the governorate is taking this motivates, and it gives him the capability to have a resource that he can deal with. We couldn't say as if the country is a mother and a father, and that the talk between the different ministries, they are talking in the field or in the aspect of payment. And you talked also about the person who is living in a villa, and he has you said that his market value will not change, the leasing value will not change, but we will talk about the formula, the equation with what he is dealing with. And this has a problem because its evaluation is not something accurate or according to a computer. And so the last point, the companies of the state. And I think Mr. Zakaria will talk more about this. The constitutional amendments. Let us talk about the application and then talk about the amendments of the constitution.